Rachel, first we're going to start with you in a long-running story here in San Francisco, and that is about San Francisco's sheriff. Sheriff Mirkarimi seems to not have unwound himself from this case involving his wife and domestic violence. So
right. I mean, there
week?
always seems to be something new all the time. And this week we found out that Ras Mirkarimi, who was facing 3 criminal charges, all misdemeanors, stemming from a case of alleged domestic violence on New Year's Eve, that he decided instead in a plea bargain with prosecutors to plead guilty to a lesser charge of false imprisonment. He had been facing domestic violence, battery, dissuading a witness, and child endangerment because this alleged incident took place in front of their 2-year-old son. So they again decided that they were going to have a plea bargain agreement. He's going to be sentenced on Monday. And this case just keeps going and going and going. Jury selection had been underway already. They had close to 450 potential jurors in the pool, only about 150 left. A lot of people have heard about this case. And even after sentencing Monday, we aren't sure if that's the end of the story. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not the end of the story because Mayor Ed Leak has to decide whether he wants to bring a charge of official misconduct against the sheriff. If he does that, that opens up a whole new political quagmire at City Hall because the Board of Supervisors ultimately will be the ones that will decide whether Ras Mirkarimi should be removed from office. So it's a case that hasn't ended, and it seems to just keep building and building and building.
Do you think that people outside of San Francisco understand what is going on here? Is this partially political, the fact that it keeps moving from place to place, or is it the defendant himself that keeps getting in trouble?
We have to keep in mind that this is a top law enforcement official. The San Francisco Sheriff runs one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the state of California. Here's a top law enforcement official who has pleaded guilty to a crime of false imprisonment. It's the San Francisco Sheriff that runs the San Francisco jails. I mean, so you have to kind of keep that in mind. This case has made international headlines, not just national headlines, not just local ones. One of the reasons it's international headlines as well is that his wife, Eliana Lopez, has been a soap opera star in Venezuela before she came here to move to San Francisco. So there's been attention all around that aspect of it. Is it politically tinged? Well, he's an elected official, and he's being prosecuted by an elected official, and ultimately it's elected officials that might bring charges against him. But if you listen to District Attorney George Gascon, he's like, absolutely, this is not political. We are prosecuting this case by the book. I think where Mirkarimi might have one of his best cases that this is political is that there's been information that's been leaked out from the police department over the time. But I'd say whether you're progressive, as Mirkarimi is, a moderate, conservative, San Francisco style, that this kind of information would have gotten out anyway. There are a lot of factions in the police department, and he's a high-profile city official, and there seems to be a lot of hunger around this. Is it beyond San Francisco? You go to the supermarket, the playgrounds, the schoolyards, you're on Muni, a lot of people are talking about this case.
And in that view from afar, from the South Bay, it's just embarrassing. It's like, what's going on up there? Is it just another San Francisco issue, but it goes beyond that?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, there have been a lot of things that have come out. In a pretrial hearing, we had an ex-girlfriend talking about women's panties. So, of course, that's going to get a headline, with the ex-girlfriend coming in. There's been a videotape that a neighbor has taken that was the key piece of evidence in the Mirkarimi case, which was really that the wife, Eliana Lopez, went to her to confide in her and what happened. So there's a videotape of the bruise that she allegedly got on her arm from her husband, as well as her tearfully recounting what happened. The defense teams, not only for Mirkarimi's defense team, plus the wife's lawyers have tried every avenue they could to try to keep that out of evidence in the trial. So there have been a lot of motions before the courts, a lot of coverage of that. And Mirkarimi's legal bills keep climbing. He's already had two fundraisers that we know of to try to tamp down the legal bills.
But wasn't it a comment of his about his legal bills that got him in trouble with the DA?
That was one of the things. So another aspect this week is that after he entered his plea on Monday in Superior Court, he said, I am guilty of this crime of false imprisonment of my wife. He then had comments that were both in the Mateer and Ross column in the Chronicle as well as the Bay Guardian, not direct comments from him, but from people around him saying, perhaps the main reason he pleaded guilty was because of the legal bills, because he wanted to end this issue that was kind of consuming his family. He wanted to put it behind him. So Gascon came out this week, told the Chronicle editorial board, if he's guilty, then he should plead guilty. But if he doesn't really think he's guilty, he shouldn't plead guilty, and we should take this to trial and let a jury decide that. So on Monday at the sentencing hearing, the judge is likely to ask Mirkarimi, do you really feel you're guilty? And on a domestic violence charge, it's related to it. In fact, the punishment that he's facing right now is everything that a domestic violence offender would face. He's 3 years probation. He has to enter domestic violence intervention classes every week for a year. He had to apologize to the neighbor who shot the videotape because before they were maligning her, the defense team. He has court fees and fines. So there's a lot that he might even have to take parenting classes and do 100 hours of community service.
Let's talk about the mayor's role here. What are his choices? One of his choices was to just, if people didn't like it, to have him recall.
Right. So a recall effort can start against a public official 6 months after they've taken office. He took office on January 8th, so by July 8th is when they can start this petition drive. You have to collect about 47,000 signatures from registered voters in San Francisco. Not the easiest thing to do, but it's possible to do. It's possible if those signatures are collected, it could be in the November election, or if they can't meet the deadlines, it could be at a later date in a special election. Misconduct is not the easiest thing to do, and it's been tried very infrequently in San Francisco. In the 1930s, there was a public defender who was removed from office, and he was involved in a murder-for-hire scheme. When George Moscone was mayor, which is quite a long time ago, he removed an airports commissioner, and a higher court overturned the misconduct charge on that. That's the only other time. There's a San Francisco supervisor more recently, Ed Jew, who got in trouble for shaking down some members of the public. He was facing the misconduct charge, but he resigned before it ever got progressed very far. That's it in San Francisco history. There's a lot of lawyering going on now. What constitutes misconduct? Is it something that can be upheld? The mayor's saying he's giving it very close consideration, working with the city attorney. He's also talking to former mayors to see what the political implications might be. How do you handle it politically?
You think there's any chance he could resign?
No, correct.
Right. I mean, that's a good question. So there's been a strong demand that he resign from advocates for domestic violence victims. They've been in City Hall and talking to the mayor and supervisors saying, look, he shouldn't be in this office in this position. He's been steadfast, though. I'm not resigning. I'm planning to mend my family and do the job I was elected to do.
Gary, you're reporting on a story that's long-term, much longer term than this story that's only been in the news for a few weeks. You're talking about something that's been talked about for maybe the last half century?
50, 60 years. It was in the 50s when they were conceiving the BART district, and at the time San Mateo County was going to be originally a part of it, and the idea would be if San Mateo County got into it, it would come to Santa Clara down the peninsula. Well, when San Mateo County opted out, partly because they feared that the Serramonte Shopping Center would lose customers because people would take BART instead of 280, which hadn't been built yet. And so San Mateo opted out. Santa Clara County didn't have a chance. But over the 20-plus years I've been doing this transportation stuff, that's been the number one question. When's BART coming to San Jose? Well, it's coming down the East Bay. A lot's happened in those 50, 60 years, and Silicon Valley happened. It wasn't a farming community anymore, and a lot of people who worked in the valley live in the East Bay, Contra Costa County, Alameda County, and as far east as the Stockton area. And so the county voters have twice passed taxes to get it, and just this past week the federal government signed off on a $900 million federal full funding agreement that will come over the next several years, and construction starts this summer.
Was that just a $900 million lying around someplace waiting on what?
Well, it's part of their, but they have a pot of money. I want to say it's more than a couple billion every year for new starts projects, new rail projects, and it'll come in like $100 million increments. And once the FTA was convinced that not only could they build it, but they could operate the trains, it got a recommended rating. When they just had money to build it, it was on their not recommended list. So they came back, they shortened the line, the initial phase of it, and they got a tax by passed the 2/3 majority by just a couple thousand votes back in last November, and the Fed said, okay, you're in.
So Gary, it goes not all into the heart of downtown San Jose at this point, right? But that's still a possibility that will do that.
It will go to East San Jose, right near the Berryessa Avenue Highway 101 interchange, and that's about 6 miles short of where it wants to eventually go to tunnel downtown. That's a $4 billion, the second part, and they have about $2 billion of that. And so they're looking for money, but it's going to be tougher to come by because the state commit money to high-speed rail versus BART?
So just with it stopping there near Berryessa, is it going to become a train to nowhere? I mean, what happens once you get off the train?
They're going to have express buses running from there to downtown. And the federal government actually has a loan program where if you can be convinced, if they can be convinced that you've got money to eventually build it, they can loan you the money. Los Angeles is doing that for a 30-year transportation program. And one thought being now, this current tax to build BART will expire in 2036. That seems really far out there, but if they renew that tax, pass a ballot measure now to renew that tax, then go back to Feds, say, we've got money coming down the line. Can we bond out? Can we move this forward? And there's some optimism there.
Is there any talk at all of actually having it kind of ring the Bay, that it eventually could come up the peninsula to San Mateo and San Francisco, or is that just, don't get ahead of ourselves?
Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the line will run to Santa Clara, and it will meet with the Caltrain station in Santa Clara. So that's right up the peninsula. But when high-speed rail comes in, if it comes in on the peninsula, that's where that's going to run. So it's, I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think it's just too costly.
Just finally, does it go past the new stadium? Is it any place connected?
If it goes downtown, it will be within a walking distance of the stadium.